It's over, isn't it? Why can't I move on? Well, looks like it's not over yet. Hello everybody, I'm KC and welcome to a very special edition of Let's Talk About, because guess what's back, baby? We've covered a lot of subjects here on Let's Talk About over the last 100 episodes, from Pokemon to ponies, from musicals to mockumentaries, from reboots and spin-offs of beloved cartoons to ambitious fan-made projects, from classic horror stories to modern superhero tales. We've covered a lot of bases here, but what started this channel off properly was my love for what would eventually become my favorite show of all time, Gravity Falls. It was the main focus when this channel started, including being the subject of the very first Let's Talk About here on YouTube. For my first anniversary of that video, I counted down my favorite episodes of Gravity Falls, and for my second anniversary, I counted down 20 of my favorite TV shows, which of course had Gravity Falls at the top of the list. So to me, it only made sense for the 100th episode to return to my roots and make the return of Gravity Falls an event here on Let's Talk About. Yay! Now, I'm not one of those people who was clamoring for another season. I was perfectly happy with how the show ended properly. However, with the rise of well-known animated shows continuing their stories in comic form, even while some of these shows are still going, many thought this avenue would be perfect for Gravity Falls, and so did I. The characters of Gravity Falls and the world of bizarre imagination they inhabit was just full of untapped potential. If the story the show wanted to tell was over, there was so much more you could have done. And with comics, you could expand on a show without hurting the main product, since most of the time, a show's comics are pretty easy to ignore if you want to. But to me, Gravity Falls comics seemed like a win-win situation. With supplementary material like this being pretty common nowadays, fans were hoping, if not begging, that Gravity Falls would someday get the same treatment. And at the D23 Expo on July 2017, we got our wish with the announcement of Gravity Falls Lost Legends. Only 1 year of wild speculation later, and here it is. The Gravity Falls graphic novel, Lost Legends. Unlike most of its kin from shows that have already concluded, this is not a continuation of post-series content. The reason it's called Lost Legends is because it contains 4 standalone stories that, for the most part, take place in the same summer that the main series did. After all this time, was the wait for more Gravity Falls worth it? Well, let's dive right into Lost Legends. The book starts us with Shmebulok? Okay, that's an interesting place to start. Actually, it turns out that Shmebulok, of all people, is actually quite intelligent and observant, but was cursed to only say his name with the exception of one night every 1,000 years. And he's using this precious once-in-a-millennium moon to tell a bunch of hunger-for-content fans extra stories that he gathered by rooting through trash about the Pines' time in Gravity Falls. Oh, I miss his absurdity so much. He's also a big fat stand-in for us fans. Well, certain fans. But anyway, as I mentioned, this graphic novel is broken up into 4 separate stories, which Shmebulok introduces us to in this table of contents. That doesn't have the page numbers for the stories, so I'm not sure what the point is really. But before we get to the individual stories, I want to talk about the general vibe I got from reading this. Mostly about how perfectly paced every story is. I don't think I can quite explain my exact feeling, but the way the stories play out, this really does feel like 4 lost episodes of Gravity Falls. The jokes are on point, they spend just the right amount of time in each scene, and when I heard this was going to be 4 separate stories, I thought they were going to find some way to tie them all together. But the approach they did take of just telling 4 really good standalone stories makes each story as strong as it could be, and keeps the spirit of what individual episodes of Gravity Falls were capable of, being exciting, hilarious, and throwing in some sentiment and development for these characters we love so much. And all of that is evident in our first story, Face It, which right off the bat gives us something fans were sorely missing in the main series, a post-Northwest Mansion mystery Pacifica story. Now, I was never really disappointed that we didn't see much of Pacifica after her big redemption because, you know, there was some other stuff going on. Although I did find her attitude during Weirdmageddon a bit off after everything she went through in that episode, but I am of the camp that people, even fictional characters, don't change overnight, especially so drastically. drastically. That'd be just as jarring as no change at all. And Face It is an excellent example of that. Pacifica asked Dipper for a magical solution to help with a wrinkle, which I can only assume was caused by stress because she's 12, but Dipper says that messing with magic is too dangerous, and if anyone would know that, it's Dipper. And Ford, but he somersaulted out of a 2-story window on the first page. I don't know about you guys, but that's the moment I knew we were properly back in Gravity Falls. Pacifica decides to mess with magic anyway, because of course she does, and summons a creature to clear her skin known only as Mr. What's-His-Face, who is another top-tier monster of the week for Gravity Falls. Right up there with the Shapeshifter and the Summerwing Trickster in terms of creepy and creative concept and design. Dipper and Mabel interrupt the show's latest Faustian bargain, and in the process, Mr. What's-His-Face accidentally clears Mabel's face. Literally. This is something I always loved about Gravity Falls. A creature that steals someone's face is fairly common in fiction, but Mr. What's-His-Face takes that familiar monster and puts a unique twist on it. Not only by how he persuades others to let him mess with their faces in the first place, but also what he does with those faces, which we'll get to in a minute. For now, we have another Dipper and Pacifica reluctant supernatural adventure. And while I love Northwest Mansion Mystery, it wasn't until I read this story where they're cool with each other but still don't see eye to eye that I realized how much I love their chemistry. Their conflicting personalities bouncing off each other in this situation is just so much fun to read. This is also the time where Dipper finally finds a use for that president's key he got all the way back in Irrational Treasure. This may be a weird thing to point out, but I was always surprised that this thing never came up again on the show itself. It seems like such a useful tool that I guess they just never found a use for. Well, better late than never, I guess. This leads Dipper and Mabel to a paranormal black market. Okay, so remember at the beginning when I said the world of Gravity Falls had a lot of untapped potential? This is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. With how many magical creatures just hide around this one town, of course Gravity Falls would have some kind of seedy underground marketplace for the supernatural. Mr. What's-His-Face is here in the first place because he sells the faces he steals. I am in love with this place just conceptually, but this 2-page spread introducing the location is packed to the brim with visual gags and returning creatures from the main show and even creatures we learned about in Journal 3. I couldn't possibly point out all the little cameos and gags, but I think I stared at this page for 5 minutes trying to take in everything that was here before I moved on. Not to mention it comes with some great creature hijinks, like Dipper and Pacifica being auctioned off by this little guy that, not sure what he's supposed to be, but am I the one who thinks he's a little precious? A cameo by Slender Man low on cash, which makes sense given how badly his movie bombed, and our first dose of nightmare-fueled humor is surprisingly not from this place. It's this. I'll go over the artwork as a whole later, but I wanted to point out this part specifically because it's a gag that really shouldn't work in a comic book, but it does. You know the art is exceptional when you can hear the exact sound of that pencil going across her blank face. The final few pages are another step of progression for Pacifica, revealing why she's so concerned about her looks to an almost obsessive level. Pacifica's parents raised her to believe that appearance was everything and nothing underneath that mattered. And after we saw just how her parents treat her if she steps out of line with what they consider acceptable, it suddenly becomes very clear why she thought summoning a magical con man was a good idea. And again, she's hardly the only person in this town guilty of that. I really like this. It gives context to one of Pacifica's least appealing character traits, her vanity. And it's nice to see Dipper reassuring her of all the good qualities underneath that he's taken the time to find in her through both of their adventures. And with newfound confidence, Pacifica ends up avoiding temptation by Mr. What's-His-Face and rescues Dipper and Mabel from a faceless fate. It's a great conclusion. I really love the message here from both Pacifica and Dipper. Yes, Dipper had something to learn here too. He was criticizing Pacifica through the whole adventure for caring so much about her looks, but eventually he took the time to understand why she's going to all this trouble. After all, Dipper's not a stranger to the idea of trying to keep up an appearance to please someone else. It shows that just because something doesn't seem important to you, doesn't mean it's not important to someone else, which is a great lesson to learn. And once Dipper does understand this, he's able to help Pacifica bring out out what is really great about her. The same kind of revelation we saw back in Northwest Mansion Mystery, but at the same time, we aren't treading old ground here. In that episode, she learned that she didn't have to follow her parents' example. Now she's trying to figure out what exactly that means for her, who she is when she's not trying to live by her family's expectations. This feels like a nice sequel to a great episode, including another hug to fuel the shipping fire. Look, I don't ship it, but I know this page made a lot of people happy. But I gotta admit, my favorite part of this climax is Pacifica seeing Ford for the first time. That was perfect. In the next story, Comics Up, Seuss brings over a bunch of comic books for the others to enjoy, but it turns out that Stan doesn't like comics. So he confiscates them and puts them in this mysterious chest in Ford's closet that is definitely not cursed. Nope, no way, no how. This upsets Seuss, asking, what'll I complain about online now? I feel called out. But it turns out that ominous chest with a skull on it that belonged to a paranormal scientist was, in fact, cursed.
What a twist!
So Stan gets sucked into a cursed comic book, and it's up to Ford and the others to go get him. I sense some style changes and meta humor coming. What follows is the gang running around through different genres of comics. In the same vein as episodes like Little Gift Shop of Horrors and Fight Fighters, the book takes on various comic art styles with playful parody all throughout. There are way too many jokes here to count, including the classic using the word bubbles in the fight gag. And the art styles from various time periods and comic eras are on point. Right down to having stains and rips and crumplings on the pages to make it look older. Gravity Falls was always great at satire with love and accuracy in terms of style that wasn't afraid to throw a bit of shade. A lot of shade, really. Even at their own professions.
Those monsters are just tiny clay figures moved around one frame at a time by an antisocial shut-in.
Those people are called animators.
And they did that once again with everything from the innocent 50s with off-center inking to the gritty 90s to traditional superheroes to... oh my god. I have nothing. I think this one speaks for itself. Eventually the group gets separated and Seuss is blown away into the margins of the panels. Hilarious. And, okay, I know I just said I wasn't going to point out all the great jokes in the story because there are a ton, but I have to give a special mention to this because it's true. That D in Disney has bugged me since I was 5 years old, and it finally got called out. Anyway, Seuss manages to find Stan when he recognizes the sound of his sobbing. I feel like that is the story behind it. And finds him in, oh my god, this is so cute! Seuss and Stan are adorable in this Peanuts-like art style, and I just want to hug them both. Here it's revealed that Stan actually loves comics. Or at least he did when he was a kid. He loved them so much that he wanted to create his own, but was immediately shot down for very Stan reasons, and it crushed his passion in comics altogether. This was a cute twist that I didn't give much thought beyond what was on the surface at first. Mostly I just saw it as confirming a long-lasting fan theory that Stan is a very creatively ambitious person. You either have to be very imaginative or very twisted to come up with some of those Mystery Shack exhibits. But reading it again, I feel like more could be read into this that, whether it was intentional or not, is worth discussing. How damaging shooting down creativity in a kid can be. I think all of us have had experiences like this as kids, whether it was ourselves or a friend, that when you try to do something artistic or creative and when you show it to an adult, some immediately shoot it down, saying that it's a waste of time or that it won't amount to anything, that it's not good enough. Constructive criticism is one thing, especially when they want to be taken seriously, but that is not what this is, and sadly, that's not usually what happens. Dismissing a kid for just trying to express themselves through something creative can easily crush their spirits and passion for the art form, especially a kid like Stan who already has self-esteem issues. You get put down like that enough and it could ruin your love for the thing that made you so happy, which is what happened with Stan. He was so heartbroken by that rejection that he gave up on comics altogether, which is really freaking sad when you give it enough thought. But even though it's framed as a joke, Seuss essentially tells him that we live in a time where he can find his own audience. That, thanks to the internet, you can have an army of creepy fans without leaving your basement. And again, I feel called out. But with this revelation, Stan learns his lesson, the gang escapes the comic through violence, and Stan does find an audience for his comic book with kids who like the book because it has swearing in it. I'd laugh if it wasn't so accurate. The third story is probably my favorite in the book because it has exactly what I was hoping for when this project was first announced. Sure, the previous stories and the one that follows are all excellent, but this gives us something the show couldn't. Post-Weirdmageddon content. How everything is going out, there isn't a sociopathic Dorito looming over their heads, and now that all the major relationships are mended. And we get that with Don't Dimension It. Ford takes a family along with him into the woods to patch up some dimensional rifts left behind in the wake of Weirdmageddon. I like where this is going. And yes, Dipper and Mabel are still in Gravity Falls, since technically this takes place about 3 days before the end of the summer. And here's where we find the first of a few complaints I've seen brought up. Even though we still have a couple of days to go before the last day of summer, Stan seems to be back to his old self, completely recovered from his memory wipe at the end of Weirdmageddon. But here's the thing, we don't know that it took until Dipper and Mabel's birthday for Stan to fully recover. The journal hints at it, but it only says about a week. So I find it plausible that Stan would be fine by now. And if you don't, think of it this way. Stan may not have recovered completely yet. Sure, he seems to have his basic personality back and he recognizes everyone, but the man is over 60. There's a good possibility that there are some gaps still in there. Both ideas seem logical to me, at least. I mostly focus on Stan and Ford's more tame relationship. They don't really see eye to eye here, but these arguments are no longer poisoned by 40 years of hurt feelings. In fact, the original draft for this page had them acting much more aggressively towards each other, but this was fixed rather quickly because it was meant to be clear that they're on good terms now. This is much more of a traditional sibling rivalry as they conflict over who is the better caretaker. Spoiler alert, they're both terrible at looking after children. I know, I was shocked too. But even if they start things off, their problems are the B-plot. The main story here is about Mabel, when she gets too close to a wormhole and winds up being thrown into the space between dimensions. I think it's only fitting that I use one of Mabel's lines to express my feelings on this.
I am 1,000,000% on board with this.
Seeing some of Ford's travels in the journal was great, amazing even, but there's just something about seeing the multiverse and some of its residents in full, vibrant color that really elevates revisiting it. Especially Mabel's journey as she crashes through various dimensions, and I don't know whose idea it was to include this dimension, but I want to shake their hand because this made my day.
Is it me, or is that place we were just in awfully familiar?
Eventually, Mabel lands in a dimension comprised entirely of other Mabels. And yes, this is just as amazing as it sounds. The creativity on display here is on another level. The first full page of this dimension is yet another moment where you just have to stop and spend a couple of minutes taking it all in. And with each page, there are more new versions of Mabel introduced, and most panels have even more running around in the back. A lot of imagination went into creating this dimension, and for a story and dimension surrounding Mabel, that fits perfectly. Something that's especially fun is imagining Kristen Schaal playing all of these Mabels, especially some of the more unusual ones. It just makes it even funnier. But again, some people found a continuity error here. You see, in the journal, Ford mentions that he wound up in a parallel dimension where he ran into an alternate version of Fiddleford who helped him build his quantity stabilizer. Ford doesn't meet his parallel self because Fiddleford mentions that when dimensional doppelgangers meet and make contact, the whole universe becomes unstable and collapses around them. Some thought that this created a huge contradiction in this story, since this was dozens, if not hundreds of the same person crammed into one area. And sure, at first you could see this as a big plot hole, but to me, this didn't seem like an individual universe, but more like a hub world of sorts that draws in lost Mabels from various dimensions and naturally contains them. Maybe even to prevent that kind of cataclysm, who knows? The explanation of this universe by Explain Bell seems to support this idea, and Hirsch himself confirmed that this was the case. If Mabel had met any of these versions in her own dimension, then there'd be a problem. But back to the action. Mabel tries to get the other Mabels to help her find a way back home, but unfortunately she's surrounded by people whose ADD is worse than hers. She does find one who wants to help her, but we'll get back to that in a minute. Meanwhile, Stan and Ford head into the wormhole to go after Mabel, and I'm just so happy that this is a thing that we actually get to see. I mean, Stan tagging along with Ford on multi-universe shenanigans? Who hasn't wanted to see that? And when you think about it, this is our first time seeing Stan and Ford on any kind of supernatural adventure together. The closest we got besides this was Dungeons, Dungeons, and More Dungeons, and even that's pushing it. The banter between them is just so entertaining. They still argue, but it's more of a clash of personality now rather than any built-up resentment. From Stan's annoyance at the weirdness of the multiverse, to him poking fun at Ford when he finds out he's a criminal in various dimensions, it's everything I could have wanted and more. Mabel's teamed up with another Mabel to help send a signal to find them. When they succeed, the other Mabel double-crosses her and is revealed to be an anti-Mabel. Anti-Mabel is able to trick the Grunkles into thinking she's their Mabel because, again, these two are put in charge of children more than they ever should be. Mabel tries to rally the others to help her again, but they're all focused on their own things, which leads to Mabel's revelation. While this story has been amazing right from the start, Mabel's journey is what gives it added depth. By having the story revolve around Mabel meeting different versions of herself, it shows how far she's come as a character and how far she still has to go. Mabel is a complicated character to discuss, to say the least, especially after the events of Weirdmageddon. Some feel that Mabel didn't grow at all, that in the end, Dipper gave up what he wanted and gave her exactly what she wanted. But that's not true. This story shows that she did learn from her mistakes during Weirdmageddon. She could have stayed in that bubble, but in the end, she left her perfect fantasy world and faced the consequences head on. But others feel that this story validates those people who criticize Mabel, showing just how stuck in their own little worlds the other Mabels are, and by extension, our Mabel is. But I don't see it that way. Mabel does start out the adventure by doing something a little selfish by bringing Waddles. It's a small bit of carelessness that only focuses on her own happiness, but it's still there. This has been a thing with Mabel since day one. It was the whole point of her growth in sock opera. The difference here is that once things get serious, so does she. She only revels in the wonders of the Mabel dimension for about a minute before she starts trying to find a way back. And she never lets up. Not even when she's been betrayed by anti-Mabel. This shows that Mabel's learned, but hasn't entirely changed. And that's pretty much the entire theme of this story. A lot changed during Weirdmageddon. Perspective was gained by everyone of each other and themselves. Things are better now, and all the Pines family will be stronger in the long run, but that doesn't mean everything's perfect now. There's still a ways to go to become the best people they can be. I don't care if they just survived a freaking apocalypse. Like I said about Pacifica, I don't expect anyone to change that much in less than a week. Whether it's Mabel or Stan or Ford. What the final battle in this story shows us, besides an awesome and funny fight scene between multiple Mabels, is what we learned all too well from the show. That no matter what has happened between all of them, the good and the bad, the Pines family is strongest together. Except for Dipper, who sits this one out. Also, the classic doubles battle between Mabel and anti-Mabel and its outcome is pretty hilarious. In the end, between Mabel giving Dipper his own journal to chronicle his own adventures in, a distinct callback to Dipper's final entry in Journal 3, and Stan and Ford in the back doing the Pines chant as they seal the wormhole, this story really left me with a warm feeling and a big smile on my face. But we've still got one more story to go, and it may be the most surprising yet. The final story of Lost Legends is The Jersey Devils in the Details, which retells an adventure from Stan and Ford's childhood. This was a big surprise to me. I didn't think a story about the Sands when they were kids would be particularly interesting, since it's before all the cool stuff happened, but man was I wrong. Here we follow the original Pines twins on what is most likely their first paranormal adventure, trying to search for their father's missing gold chain before Stan gets punished for its disappearance. Stan is upset that his dad immediately assumed he took it. After all, what kind of weirdo would want that chain? But Ford, being Ford, comes to the conclusion that the thief was none other than the Jersey Devil. And personally, after seeing so much post-series fan art of the Stans returning to their hometown and encountering the Jersey Devil, it is really cool to see an official story about them going after this obvious cryptid. What I loved about this story right from the start was just how much this little adventure reminded me of when I was a kid. I can't speak for anyone else, but when I was 10, I went off on all sorts of investigations. ambitions, trying to solve mysteries and start adventures bigger than anything I could have imagined. I thought about things like that all the time and did a lot of stuff like this as a kid. And I thought that this adventure and how Stan and Ford go about it really captures doing something like this as a little kid in, unlike Gravity Falls, a pretty unremarkable town. But their investigation is in danger of being pulled out from under them by another set of mystery-solving twins, the sibling brothers, who seem to me like long-lost relatives of Fred from Scooby-Doo. And I don't know why, but when I was reading this, I almost immediately imagined these kids being played by Andrew Reynolds.
We can do it together, you and me, but mostly me.
Is it just me? Well, I thought it'd fit. Anyway, these kids are jerks. Being high and mighty, claiming to be the superior mystery twins, and putting the boys down at first glance pretty much immediately. Actually, I take back the Fred comment. Maybe these kids are distant relatives of the Northwests. But after some hilarious investigation antics, including Ford being accepted among carnies and showing that Stan's way with words hasn't really changed since he was 12, which should really speak volumes, shouldn't it? And the less adorable moment when the boys think they killed the sibling brothers and walk away, but not before stripping them of their clothes for a disguise. Well, I don't think Gravity Falls is as dark as people think it is. It really tells you how messed up it could get when I wasn't entirely sure they were still alive. Eventually, they find their way into a cave that might lead them to the Jersey Devil, and Stan takes a moment to ask Ford if he thinks he's a bad kid. See, up until this point, this story has just been cute and kind of disturbing fun, but this is where we get into some of the heavier territory. Stan's relationship, or lack thereof, with his father has been something heavily speculated on by fans, and these next couple of moments more or less confirm all of it. How much it hurts him that his dad immediately blamed him for the lost chain, how he's so hard on him compared to Ford, how every time he tries to find some way to catch up with his brother or make his father proud, it falls apart and only paints him in a worse light. I would try to analyze this deeper, but I don't really need to. It's all there in raw, heartbreaking simplicity that can only be expressed by a kid who has been told time and time again that he isn't good enough. So much so that he believes in himself. And the reveal that Stan did take the chain after all and didn't say anything only emphasizes that and makes it more poignant. The fact that he was trying to do something nice for his dad and was too scared to admit it when things went south says it all. Oh, and they do find the Jersey Devil. It may not have taken the chain, but that doesn't make it any less hungry. In the end, Stan and Ford prove themselves to be the superior mystery twins of New Jersey, save the Jersey Devil, and accept a summer-long grounding together. This finale and the way it's resolved is both heartfelt and kind of tragic in retrospect. I mean, think about this for a minute. What happened here? Ford had to choose between a dream come true or protecting his brother who didn't tell him the truth because he was scared. Doesn't that sound familiar to you? The only major difference between this and the science project incident was that Stan and Ford had a moment alone. And Ford was angry and upset that Stan lied to him, but in that moment, they both have the time to let it all out. Given that time, Ford quickly understands why Stan didn't come forward, and in the end is given the choice to either punish him for one mistake or stand up for him and achieve their dreams together. We could argue all night long over the circumstances that led to Stan and Ford becoming so distant, but this could be seen as an example of what went wrong that night. If things hadn't escalated so quickly and Stan and Ford were given the time to just talk to each other as brothers, maybe we could have avoided the whole mess of that night we saw all the way back in A Tale of Two Stans. I have no idea if that's what Hirsch's intention was with this adventure, but that's what I got out of it. This story essentially shows us what used to be, what could have been, and how things will be for the original Pines twins from now on. And I'm not gonna lie, the transition in the final page put yet another big smile on my face. And so did this little shanty at the end of Stan and Ford's seafaring adventures, but it was an entirely different kind of smile. After all the Sea Grunks adventures I've seen created by fans, it's really cool to see certain things in an official piece of work. Although I've combed through tons of fan art and fan fiction on Stan of War hijinks, and I don't think I've ever seen anything involving Stan and Ford running into leprechauns. How did none of us think of that? It seems so obvious in hindsight. So, after that huge breakdown, it may go without saying, but the writing is exceptional. It really does feel like reading lost transcripts from the show that were made into this amazing bonus content that at the same time manages to translate and flow with a new format seamlessly. The only major difference is that there are points where things could get a bit more mature. Now, it's not like the TV show didn't have that. It had it in droves, in fact, but it managed to get on the air. Maybe Disney was just cool with more stuff than people realized, but there were certain things in here that just wouldn't fly on television. Like kids saying hell, or mentioning alcohol, or implying that our heroes may have killed two kids by pushing them off a cliff and then not seeing them again for several minutes. But if anyone was going to get this stuff in a Disney comic, let's be honest, it was going to be Gravity Falls. The only complaint I really have with this book is that I wish I could hear the show's incredible voice actors perform these lines. That's it. The book felt so much like Gravity Falls that a part of me wishes it was the whole package. But before I get into wrapping this up, I want to take some time to go over the artwork. You've been looking at it for the last several minutes, and if you are a huge fan of Gravity Falls, some of these styles might look familiar to you. All the way through, the art is gorgeous. Each artist putting their own twist on the standard Gravity Falls style. It makes the artwork in each chapter very distinct, and in the case of Comics Up, works on a whole nother level, translating these characters into several different iconic comic styles. The backgrounds are well detailed, just like the show, and packed with many cameos and callbacks. I guarantee you will not see everything this comic has to offer on your first read-through. It's eye-popping and engaging with vibrant layout work and posing. The expressions, with one or two exceptions, are perfectly representative of the needed mood of each character, whether it be comedic or dramatic, and seeing this much life brought to both new and old characters and environments in less motion than we're used to from this world is breathtaking. But why did I point out that these styles might look familiar? Well, for one, some Gravity Falls alum helped out with the art in this book, not to mention several well-recognized comic artists. The most exciting one for me was the fact that Dana Terrence did the artwork for the Jersey Devils in the Details. Her storyboard work on the original show is something I always admired. She brings such life to her work, and it's wonderful to see it tell a whole story. But the biggest, and in my opinion most notable contributions, came from the artists behind Face It and Don't Dimension It. If you've been a part of the fandom for a while, you've probably seen these styles before. That's because they were done by fan artists. Face It was drawn by Pito Pishi, and Don't Dimension It was drawn by Kiki Kit, two of the most talented and recognizable fan artists in the community. And also, if you were wondering who was responsible for the manga moment, that was Pito Pishi too. This was huge news when people realized they were working on this. In fact, I remember when the first piece of promotional art for the book came out at D23, everyone collectively tilted their heads and said, that looks a lot like Kiki's work. So why is this such a big deal? It's not like fan artists haven't become part of the official products before. Well, no matter how many times it happens, it's exciting. Some people see fan works like this and this as pointless. A waste of time when you could be doing something original. But here's the thing, these are original in their own way. Telling stories from angles the show never did, or even bringing something many people love to life in a new style. It can be refreshing and even exhilarating to see such time and passion being put into creating more content for something you and the artist love. And sometimes even the creators take notice. And in the age of the internet, there are countless examples of this. As far as I know, these two weren't looking for work like this at the time. Fans just pointed Hirsch towards them when he asked about talented fan artists. He didn't even mention he was looking for potential talent for Lost Legends, though some of us were suspicious of that. And they rose to the occasion of what was probably a daunting yet exciting task exceptionally. And with this, we learned something important. When fans put themselves out there in a positive, passionate way, it can leave a great impact. The only reason this graphic novel exists in the first place is because we begged for it. Alex Hirsch, the show's first fan, decided to come back and write the whole thing, because I guess he hates free time, and when it came time to bring it to life, he brought in not just well-known professionals who love the show as well, but people who put their talent and free time into a pursuit of purely passion. I don't think either of these two expected to get anything out of all this work outside of some extra followers on Tumblr, but now they are part of the product they love. And isn't that kind of wonderful? Lost Legends ends with Shmebulok making one last declaration to the reader to go out there and start a new adventure. This is a sentiment also expressed at the end of the journal from a couple of years ago, and this is something Alex Hirsch himself says a lot. And as far as I'm concerned, this is that message in 4 chapters. So many people love the story Gravity Falls told that we wanted to see new stories for it, even if it wasn't on TV. From the talented people who created this book from all walks of life, to the consumers and fans who not only wanted to see this made, but helped it hit the top tiers of the New York Times bestseller list and Amazon's bestseller list. Only beaten out by some of the most popular children's book series out at the moment. And that's for bonus stories from an animated show that ended years ago. Way back from my first anniversary, when I talked about my favorite episodes of Gravity Falls, I ended by saying I would be all for a comic series, but if that didn't happen, I'd be okay with that. Because the show was a wonderful experience in and of itself, and I was grateful for that and everything it gave me. And about 3 years and over 500 subscribers later, I'll end this video with a similar sentiment. I would be all for another volume of Gravity Falls comics. The numbers certainly support one, and Hirsch has expressed interest in doing another, though that was possibly before he signed that deal with Netflix, so who knows what the future holds for Gravity Falls. If this is it, I'm still okay with that, because between the journal, a complete series DVD and Blu-ray set available, which I never thought was going to happen, a global real-life cipher hunt, and Lost Legends with its wildly entertaining and engaging writing, artwork, and even its own set of secrets and codes, it's more than I ever expected to see from Gravity Falls when I saw the credits roll on that final episode back in 2016. Fans should move forward when something they love is finished, and not hound the people who gave them the thing they love for more out of a sense of entitlement. But that doesn't mean forget about it, or stop pouring love and passion into creating your own work surrounding it, or even something original inspired by it. Future stories and adventures are inspired by the ones that are left behind, the ones already told and continue to be told throughout the years, that motivate people to be better and more creative. And sometimes, if you're lucky, those imaginative worlds might come back with some more tales to tell. For $14.99 at Barnes & Noble. Before I go, I want to thank you all for your support for this one of thousands of YouTube reviewers. I may not have the biggest subscriber count out there, or anywhere close to it, but ever since I started putting myself out there with this series, I've read lovely comments from a lot of you who appreciate these videos I work so hard on, made a few great and wonderful friends, and have had opportunities to work on things that I've always wanted to do. And none of that would have been possible if I didn't take the chance on all of this and you guys were willing to listen to any of these last 100 episodes. So really, thank you all again so much for that. Here's to the next 100. But now I want to know what you guys thought. Are you glad Gravity Falls made a return, and do you think it was worth the wait? What was your favorite Lost Legend? And if someday there is a volume 2, what future adventures would you like to see from this bizarre, wonderful animated world? Let me know in the comments. After all, that's why this series is called Let's Talk About. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.